Hey guys, Henning and Morten from FlippedNormals here. If you want to follow along with these tutorials, all the project files are available for a free download on the FlippedNormals marketplace, so check out the link in the description. And in this video, we are going to be taking our lightsaber through from the block-in model we currently have, and we're going to be finalizing the actual model. So if you have watched the last chapter and you've been following, you're probably going to have something like this. So we are going to be splitting this piece here into different models, and then we're going to be adding subdivision modifiers to this and making this a nice production ready model.
So this is what we talked about earlier in terms of material, sort of like how you split it out based on materials. So you see there's a lot of different parts to this. Some things look like, I don't know, maybe they're aluminum, some brass, fake brass, some plastic or rubber parts. So it's important to separate these out so you can apply different materials to them.
Yeah, this is really how I think about it. Is the orange thing here going to be the same part as the metal thing here? Well, different materials, different pieces. So we are going to be starting with the top parts. And now there are different ways to interpret this. And this is a lightsaber, you know, who knows what's going on here. But we're going to be assuming that the top part here, this is all one piece. And then this is one piece. So let's split this up. Just make sure to go under front view, and we can do this easily by hitting the 3 key, and now we can select the polygon. And then we can hit Ctrl and plus on a numpad, and this is going to select the various parts. Now we need to separate these pieces out, because currently it's the same mesh. And then we hit the P key for that. Here you can just select by selection, so whatever is selected is going to be a separate part. So we check up here now. Now we suddenly have this as a separate piece.
And one important thing to note here is that there's many different ways to do selections like this. The grow selection is an excellent way to, you place one point and you grow it. You could also just do a sort of like a shift selection over your entire model to select it. The issue here is that you have to be in wireframe mode first. So I believe it's Shift C. You go
Shift Z.
Yeah, Shift C, Shift Z. You go into wireframe mode in order to be able to select the faces that are behind what you can currently see. If you're not in wireframe mode, you'll only be able to select whatever you can see in the viewport.
You can also go into the X-ray mode as well, and so X-ray, Alt Z, or you can do Shift C, and then you can select as well. It's really annoying because you actually can't select what's behind it.
For anyone out there listening, like when we say Z or Z, we mean the same thing.
Yeah, exactly.
You know. There's always comments about that, especially like for ZBrush stuff or ZBrush stuff.
ZBrush. No, it's not. So now we can select this loop here. And we do this by clicking on one edge, or one polygon, and then we just Alt-click on the other one. Now this selects the whole loop going around it. I prefer to do it like this, because a lot of times it's not as easy as just selecting straight ahead. Your loop might be going crazy around. And now we just know it's going to work the entire way. Then we hit Ctrl plus, and again a numpad, and we hit the P key by selection.
So P to explode.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know.
P for pepperate. Yeah, I have nothing.
Pepperate?
I have nothing.
Yeah, I don't know. I can't come up with any words.
Then we have the same thing for this one. This piece around here, which looks to be a brighter color, and Alt-click on it, and then Ctrl plus, and we can now hit the P key again. And this is what we were talking about before. Just embrace that Blender is hotkey based.
Yeah.
If you try to fight this, you're going to be going through a lot of menus, a lot of very obscure menus. So just get used to using these hotkeys right away. And then we go all the way down here, and now we're just going to be separating out some of these pieces.
One thing to keep in mind is when you're selecting a ring like this or a loop of polys, or if it's loops or whatever it is, it's that depends on where your cursor is in relation to selecting it. So if you want to select a loop all the way around, you have to select in the direction of where you want to select. So you can see here you're selecting towards the right, then you go right. If you go up and down, it selects up and down. So this is just something to keep in mind and be aware of.
Yeah, this was really confusing to me in the beginning of Blender. You see if we hit the left side now, it selects the loop going around here. And if we hit the top, it selects up and down. This takes some time to get used to, but once you know it's there, it's perfectly fine. This is where I wish Blender had a little visual indicator, but it doesn't really
And you can
need that.
combine these as well, so you don't have to only select one to the right or up or down. You can combine them as well.
If you hit the Shift key, now you can add to this as well.
Yeah,
It
so
becomes very
Shift, Alt, and then left mouse button to combine it.
Yeah, exactly. This is one of these things you just have to get used to. It just takes a bit of time. So let's just see what we have selected now. We still have some pieces up here, but let's get to this a bit later on. We're going to be separating out this piece here now. So we can do the same thing now and just Alt click, and then we can hit Ctrl plus, and then we can select it. And let's just look at our reference. And again, you don't have to adhere to this reference 100%. You know, you can freestyle a little bit. It is a lightsaber after all, so you know. And we're also not modeling, for instance, some of the paneling here. We're keeping this a bit simple.
Oh, one thing as well is you can also subtract a loop selection. Just like you can add a loop selection, you can subtract the loop selection.
Yeah, same thing. Just hold on the Shift key and do the same. Just click on the same points. Add it and then subtract it.
Yeah, so if you grew the selection, for example, and you didn't want the bottom part there to be selected, it's very easy to just remove that.
Yeah. We hit the P key again to separate this out. And now we have most things separated out. So now we have only like one piece here down. We have to select more, and then we can show you a little trick. I love these little tricks.
I love tricks. Tricks are the best.
Yeah.
Especially in Blender, because there's like infinite amount of tricks.
There is so many tricks. Again, loop, select one loop, and then grow selection. And then we hit the P key. Now you should be familiar with this by now. We're really doing the same thing over and over again. And now we have a little trick. So now you see we have all these pieces. They're all separate. So what we could do in order to separate them out is separate. I mean, they're not connected with polygons. So what we could do, we could select this piece here, and then we could select everything, or we could select everything here and separate out, or we could select everything by hitting the A key. We can hit the P key now, and now we can select by loose parts.
So that just means if it's not connected by at least one vertex or an edge, then Blender doesn't see it as connected piece of geometry, which it isn't. So it just automatically separates it all out into separate objects.
Very, very useful. So now we can start to refine the different pieces, and we can basically take this to a final level. So let's start now with the bottom. We can also hold down the tilde key or the one below the escape key and just go to selected view, and that just view selected, and that just makes it a lot quicker to go to them. So let's look at our reference here. We still have to refine this a little bit. So let's select the loop, go into edge mode, alt click on the loop, and we can just scale this up a little bit. Hit the S key to scale it up. And if you need time with this, just pause the video. It might take time to get used to these tools. It took me some time for this to become intuitive.
Yeah, same for me.
And then we can hit the E key for extrude. And now you can see it just extrudes it. It just extrudes it based on the view axis. And then we right click. So now it's still extruded, but it's cancelled it. So we can now hit the G key, and we can set, and we can just move this up a little bit, like so. We can hit the Ctrl R key, and now we can just add a bit more refinement to this. So Ctrl R, and then just click and drag. And then we can just scale it down a little bit by hitting the S key, and just scaling it down just a little bit. We can do scale up a little bit again. This is where you can really keep refining this forever. So we can add another loop. I just want this to be in the middle, so right click to cancel it. And then we hit the S key again, and we just scale it up just a little bit, just to refine the shape.
So a good principle to work from when you're doing modeling like this is that you want to aim towards getting as few loops in as possible to support your shape. If you can't get the shape that you want, that means you need more loops. But if you have more than enough loops to support the shape, maybe you can actually take some away.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense to just keep adding these. Like that does nothing. That just confuses the shape. Let's add another one down here as well and just scale it up just a little bit.
Yeah, so you can see that bottom shape there was completely straight, but so we actually need another loop around to give it that rounded bottom shape.
Then we can select this piece here. This is what we call an Ngon. You might have heard of an Ngon before, an n-sided face. This is a polygon which has more than 4 sides. So the computer will triangulate every single polygon. So whatever you see here, it all really triangles under the hood. which is very easy to do if you have something like this. It can triangulate this way or it can triangulate that way. But with something like this, the computer just goes a bit crazy because it doesn't really know what to do with this. So either you should turn this into triangles or turn it into quads, just 4-sided polygons. So we can easily do this. If we just inset this a little bit, hit the I key and just drag, and then we can just add it. Do it one more time. Now we can easily turn this into polygons, into 4-sided polygons. If we just delete this now, hit the X key and then faces, and then we can select the if we go into the edge mode, we can now easily select the whole by holding Alt left mouse button and just clicking on this. So we have a really nice feature here called grid fill. We can use this to very quickly fill in this with quads. If you hit the spacebar now, which we remember in the first video we set up spacebar to be as search. If not, it's F3. Now we can type grid fill, and if we just hit grid fill now you can see it fills it in with really nice quads. You can see here though it doesn't fit perfectly with the axis, so we can just hit offset, and now it's just going to offset it, and there we go. We have really nice quads now.
And you might ask yourself, why do I need that? Well, it's a nice modeling practice because it means that whenever under the hood, when you have deformation, not so much for a hard surface object like a lightsaber, you can always be sure how the computer generates the triangles under the hood. So either if you make it triangles or if you make it quads, you have a lot of control over it. You don't want triangles just willy-nilly everywhere in your object because it does affect how the shape looks. But on bottom faces like that, which are completely flat, you can get away with having a lot of triangles.
Yeah, we saw a few separate videos where we rant a lot about this as well.
Yeah.
So now we have a really nice shape here, and we need to add some thickness to it. The way we can do this is if we can go into face mode or polygon mode by hitting the 3 key, or we can go up here as well and just click it. Hit the A key, and now we can extrude this in. Now this is a feature we haven't used before. If we hit the Alt and E key, now you can see we have a menu for extrusion. By default, extrude will just extrude where they are, but now we have extrude along normals. And we'll explain what a normal is in a second, but let's just do this. Now you can see it just extrudes it. It's like the entire thing just becomes thicker.
Yeah, you give everything a shell. Whereas if you extrude it with the normal extrusion, not along its normal, it would just extrude it like in some direction.
Yeah, so this is where it becomes confusing because you have the term normal, which is also the name of our company here. So a normal for a polygon is it's a perpendicular line from this polygon, so it goes straight out like this. We have a point from this which goes straight like this from this. So if we were to scale this on the normal, it's going to scale like this way, this way, and this way. A normal in this sense is not synonymous with regular. Like,
no.
It's not, it doesn't have anything to do with abnormal, normal, or weird.
Like, we completely understand that this is a concept that's hard to grasp because it's like what even is stuff. 3D space, but normals are an important aspect of working in 3D. But just being aware that you can extract or extrude along the normal means that you can just add thickness or subtract thickness from your object.
It's a really handy thing, and it's something you're going to use all the time. So now we are going to be looking at a specific thing. Like, we need to just isolate this, which you can use with number backslash or forward slash, whatever it is, the slash you have on your numpad. So if we click this, you can see that everything else disappears. If for some reason for you it also moves the camera, we covered that in the very first video, how to remove that. So you can see here that we have this piece now, and it's a pretty nice piece, but it doesn't look like this piece. This piece here is nice and smooth and has really smooth edges. So we need to add this. This is what's called making them subdivision surface. It just means that you're mathematically smoothing the model. And we can do this very easily. We can do this if we go and add a modifier. And we can see generate, and we have subdivision surface. And now you can see everything becomes nice and smooth.
The really cool thing about subdivisions is that, so it's, that's why you want to model simple from the beginning. Because when you model simple from the beginning, you have a lot of control because you have fewer points to, move around and manipulate. If we were to move points around now, we would have a lot harder time to make the shape look nice compared to now. So what subdivision surfaces do is they just take 4 sided faces like this, and they just multiply it by 4. So they insert 4 edges for every face, or 4 faces for every face that we have.
And it just becomes really nice and workable. Basically, every single model you've ever seen for any commercial, film, animated series has subdivision surfaces. You wouldn't use this for games, but then you use all sorts of hacky tricks. But for any kind of work outside games, you would really use subdivision surfaces for nearly everything you're doing.
Yeah. The only problem with subdivision surfaces, I guess problem in quotation marks, which is what we're going to fix, is when you subdivide something, everything becomes smooth. And wrapping your head around this concept, I don't know, for me, maybe I'm just, I don't know, slow or something. It took me a while to understand when I first started with 3D. But you have the concept of edges and their relative distance to each other.
What this means is we now need to make these edges here really hard, because you can see here they're hard edges. So what we need to do is we need to just disable the subdivision surface modifier. We can do this very easily. This is a workflow which we really found in Blender, which we haven't really seen anyone else use. It's very simple. If we just disable the edit mode feature, and now in object mode it's still going to be displayed. But if you now go into edit mode, hitting the tab key, we can now just see our model without subdivision surfaces enabled.
And very important note here is whenever you're doing this kind of modeling with subdivision surfaces, you don't want your subdivision surfaces to be displayed while you're in edit mode. Your edit mode should be clean. Edit mode should only display the polygons that are actually there. Then you can hit the tab key to go back out into object mode to preview the changes that you've made and what your object will look like when you present it.
Yeah, otherwise you are starting like the worst modeling practices in the world.
Yeah.
So once you understand this, how to make hard edges, then it's like a light goes off when it comes to modeling. So we'll show you that really quickly now. Actually, just enable this again, so now we can see what's going on. This is only for display purposes.
Yeah, so now we're doing exactly what we told you not to do, but it's just, for emphasis here.
So now if we want this here to be really sharp, now we need to add an edge loop which is close to it. So if we hit Ctrl R now you can see the moment we add an edge loop to this and it goes closer, it becomes sharper and sharper. And if we were to add an edge loop here as well, it becomes really sharp. So you can just see how incredibly sharp this becomes. You don't want to be too sharp because nothing in real world is that sharp.
Yeah, and a good practice here is that whenever you have an edge, you generally want a supporting edge to make it hard on either side. So then you have like a crisp, clean edge. It's just really good practice instead of having one on either side. This way you can control the hardness a lot better.
Yeah, this is what's often referred to as triple edging, because you have, well, you guessed it, triple edges. You have 1, 2, and 3. And by having triple edges like this, it means that you can very easily control the smoothness of it. Now, if you want to, for instance, smooth this out a little now, like you see it's too sharp, you can use the slide tool or the grab tool with the slide feature. Hit G twice, and now you can just slide this around. So like now it's just sliding, and as you can see, it becomes just a little bit softer. Same thing down here. You can just hit G twice and just slide it, and it becomes just softer.
Yeah, so the closer the edges are to each other, the sharper of an edge that you get, really.
So that's how we can do it for this model here.
So if we turn off the preview function now, we can see, this is really how you should understand to do modeling. It's like you place your edges like this pretty close to each other to get the hard edge, and then you tap in and out of the workflow to see your subdivision, because this keeps you distraction free. It ensures that you don't work with a resolution that doesn't support what you're actually doing. It just keeps it very clean, and it's definitely the optimal way to model.
And speaking of optimal, if you see here, it was very dense. If you click optimal display, it's just going to make it not as dense, because it's just crazy dense right here, and it's hard to see what's going on.
Yeah, so with optimal, it'll subdivide your mesh, but it'll only show you the original edges before the subdivision surface modifier was applied.
So what we're going to be doing now is go out of isolation mode by hitting the slash on the numpad, and then we're just going to be doing this for every single piece. So with this one, it looks like it wraps a little bit around it. So we are just going to hit Alt, click on the edge just to select it. We're going to scale it up just a little bit, and then we can hit the E key to extrude it up. You can also do this in the orthographic view. That is a bit easier because you can only scale on one axis. So if we hit the G key now, and then we hit just middle mouse button drag up, now it's going to be perfectly aligned to only one axis.
And remember, you can cancel the extrusion action, I guess that's what it's called, with the right click.
Yeah, so if you don't want this, you can just hit a right click. But we do.
But we do.
But we do. You can also hit the set key, and that just moves it up on the set axis. And then we can do the same thing as we did with the other piece. We can go to faces, hit the 3 key, then we can hit A to select everything, and then we can hit Alt and E to extrude along normals. And then we can just move it in a little bit like this. And then we can also add a subdivision surface modifier to this as well. Now, we went in here last time to add a subdivision surface. We can also hit Ctrl 1, Ctrl 1, Ctrl 2, Ctrl 3. This all really does the same thing. If we Ctrl 1 now, you can see it adds a subdivision modifier with viewport 1. If we hit Ctrl 2, it's going to set the viewport setting to 2. This is the way some people work. They just hit Ctrl 1, 2, and then hit Ctrl 0, which is a long way to move your hand. And now you can see it becomes red, and this just indicates that there is nothing happening. If it's red, nothing is affecting your mesh. I prefer to set this something like 2 or 3, and then just disabling the edit mode, and then going in between like this.
So one thing, when we're speaking about normals here, if you go out of edit mode again, so here in object mode, you can see even though we've subdivided this twice now, it's still kind of faceted. You still get those rough edges. So maybe if you're on a budget with polygons or something, or you don't want to subdivide it more, you can just right click your object and say shade smooth or shade flat. So shade smooth, it doesn't actually add more resolution. It just looks at the borders between each polygon and just like averages that out. So you get this really nice and smooth look. Yeah,
this is really important to do, and it's for free. When you're adding resolution like this, that comes at a really heavy cost for your computer. But if you do this, that's for free.
So the optimal way is actually to combine these workflows. So you wouldn't just select something and shade smooth without the subdivision modifier, unless you're doing something for games, probably, or you want to keep it really low res.
And let's do the same thing for this guy here. Hit the slash key, and then we can go in here. And now you can see that we still need resolution in these areas. So we're just going to show you a few different ways of doing this. What we did before, we straight up hit Ctrl R and we just move them close to each other. My preferred way of doing this is actually using a tool we haven't talked about before, which is Bevel. That means that we just select, just add an edge loop like this, like we did before, in the center of a loop. Right click, so it goes in the exact center. And then we have a tool called Bevel, which is accessible by Ctrl B. And what Bevel is going to do is it's going to add more loops. It's going to split your face or your edge in half, and it's going to add more resolution like this. And this is great because now we know it's in the exact center, and we get a symmetrical loop like this. So instead of having to go in and just add a loop here and add a loop on the other side, which you don't know is symmetrical, right now you just know that the distance here is the same as the distance here. So if we were now to go in here, you can now see that it's really nice and sharp. We can also add a loop here as well, just with a regular loop tool.
And again, if you didn't want the edges to be that sharp, you simply just move the triple or double edges further from each other.
So we can do the same thing with this as well. I mean, there's a plethora of ways to do this, but really my preferred way is do this, add a Ctrl R, add a loop, right click, and then Ctrl B. And there we go.
So sometimes you have to drag it a little further than you actually think, just before the tool activates.
And then we can hit the slash again to go out of isolate selected, and then we can go up here and we can work on these pieces. Okay, so this piece here is pretty simple.
That's indeed a very simple piece.
So you can see here we now have the loop going all the way in here. So we could delete this in order to add thickness to this. We could delete this loop here and then just do the thicken we did before, the extrusion we did before, or we can do another way, which is we alt click down here and then we can do an extrusion, hit the E key, right click to disable, and then we hit S, and now we can just scale it in. And now we can use a tool we haven't shown you before, which is called the bridge tool. The bridge tool bridges different polygons together. So if you want to connect this to this, it's very easy to do. If we just shift alt click on the loop up there, now we have both of these loops selected. So we can now easily bridge these two together by right click, and then we have bridge edge loops. So this just connects them up. I always have an inherent distrust for bridge tools in 3D, but it looks like in Blender it's fairly stable.
You can run into the same issue that we had with the grid fill, where sometimes like it doesn't necessarily connect to where you expect it to connect, because like sometimes maybe edges are a little offset, so you can't always expect that. But you can always offset it.
Yeah, if that happens, then use the twist attribute here. So just set this back to 0. This is also a really cool way if you want to like add like rifling to a gun barrel.
Mm-hmm.
But we're not doing that. We're making a lightsaber, which is far cooler.
Yeah, it's a lot cooler.
So we have a loop down here as well. Let's just delete this for now. And we can do this by Ctrl X actually. Ctrl X just straight up just deletes this. It just dissolves the words. So very nice and handy. So if we now want this to be sharp, we can do the exact same thing as we did before. Ctrl R. Just drag it and then right click and Ctrl B, and now we have perfectly symmetrical loops on top and bottom. Can do it for inside as well. Now, honestly, for inside, it's not going to matter a whole lot, but you know, might as well.
What you sometimes do in a production, especially when you're modeling something like this, realistically, unless this object was going to be destroyed, you wouldn't see the faces on the inside. You would never see those. So most of the time, you would maybe delete it.
Yeah. Yeah, there's no reason to have faces you don't need. Unless you're doing a tutorial for YouTube. So do the same thing here. Right click, or Ctrl R, right click, and then just add bevel. And then the same thing here. Right click, and then doing the same thing.
Yeah, so honestly, from here on out, modeling wise, it's pretty much the same.
Yeah, there's only one surprise left. And then we hit Ctrl 1 to add the edge loops. Oh, sorry, to add the subdivision surface. And we just set this to 2. It's really cool as well because you can set the viewport subdivisions to be 0, so it's not going to do anything in the viewport. But once you hit render, you can set this to be like 10. It can be incredibly smooth in render, but really soft in the viewport. And again, that's beneficial because this is going to kill your computer. It's not going to kill it when you're doing this simple model, but if you have a huge character then or environment, it can really get dense. Right click, smooth shade, and disable this, and now we can quickly go in and out. So it's a very proper methodical approach. We are not just going around and just doing random stuff to it. We're doing the same thing over and over again, and it's controlled. So once you've been doing this a few times, you reach a point where you feel that honestly you can just model anything. This piece here as well, we can keep quite simple because there isn't really a whole lot going on here. If we were to add a subdivision surface to it, just by hitting Ctrl 2 or Ctrl 1, and then we can right click and shade smooth, you can see it's already done. And the reason is because there is nothing on the inside of it.
Yeah, so this is an example of an object that you can just keep single-sided. We don't need to add thickness to it.
Exactly. What you can do, we can go into isolation mode again, go into edit mode and the tab key, and we can still just select these points and we can just move them down just a little bit, just so there's no enters, just so they're not just floating around. Yeah,
this is just to create a little bit of an overlap with the previous shapes so that we don't have anything like, it looks more real.
Yeah, exactly. You can see it just goes inside here now. Okay, and then we can use again optimal display, and same for this guy as well, just optimal display. This because otherwise the wireframe gets very dense. Okay, this here is probably the easiest model in the world to do. So what we can do here is add an edge loop here in the middle, and you can see it's very round. So we wanna make sure we capture roundness of it. And if we just add a subdivision surface to this, Ctrl 2, you can see it's pretty much there. Make it round or smooth by right click and smooth, and optimal display. And then we can just scale in the inner edges a little bit. So tab the numpad / key and select this loop and select this loop by holding on Shift and Alt clicking on it. Now we can scale these in. The way we scale these in on one axis or anything but on only 2 axes. There we go. Is if we hit the scale tool, and then we can just hit the center one, or we can hit S and Shift Z, and then we can just drag. But again, personal preference. go out of isolation mode. Like, isolation mode is really one of these things you're going to be using a lot. I haven't really seen a whole lot of people in Blender really use it, but it's really one of the tools you wanna get used to. We're going to edit mode again, and we just want to push this thing down into it, so there's a bit of overlap. So make sure you're in edge mode, and then we select an edge loop, and just go away from that mode. Hit the G key, hit the Z key, and now we can just move it down. It's a really good idea to get used to these hotkeys, like hitting G for grab or move, and then hitting Z to constrain on our axis.
Yeah, and here, for example, let's say you didn't have the image or the reference viewport up on the left, and it was hard to see. Remember, you can hit Alt Z to sort of like have a transparent view to see, okay, how far into the object have I moved the edge now.
You can also move this up as well. Select the edge loop and hit the G key, and then hit the Z key. And I'm just going to move it up. You can see in the left screen there that it moves it up. We can do the same thing for this. Yeah, we already moved this down a little bit, so there we go. And now we can quickly add some edge loops here as well, just to get the sharpness. I hit Ctrl R to add it in the center, right mouse button, and then Ctrl B to scale her up, like so, just to add a bevel to it. And then we just need one edge loop here, and then we can just Control right mouse button, and then drag it up. And then we probably also need only one here as well. And this becomes intuitive after a little while. Ctrl 2 to add an edge loop. Oh, sorry, not an edge loop. Add subdivision surfaces. And then adding a lot of edge loops. And then shades, right click and shade smooth, and then optimal display again. So we're almost done with our model now. And you can see that, now we have a model which is really nice and smooth. And this is proper production topology. This here could be used in basically any game or any film right now. So let's take this part here as well. And very simple piece as well. What we can do is hit isolate selected, or local view as it's called in Blender. And then we alt click on the top edge, hit the E key, right click to cancel, and then we can just scale it in. And now we can just add edge loops here on the bottom, like this. Edge loops on the top, like this, to add sharpness. Control R in this, and then right click to kill it. So what we've been talking about before in some of our videos is that for modeling, you're using like 5 tools, and that's it. You're using just a few tools and using them over and over again. There are all these tutorials which uses like 30 different modeling tools for all sorts of crazy stuff. You really don't need that. You really just need to master a few tools, and you really can model most things. Ctrl 2 to add a subdivision surface modifier. Right click and shade smooth. And then out of isolation mode. And then the very last piece we have here is a little bit more complicated, but you can keep the complexity as high as you want to. Select the bottom edges by alt-clicking on it. Hit G and Z to bring it down like this. And then we're just going to extrude the top one out a little bit, just so we get this nice little lip around here. Control R to add a little edge loop, and then we can just select the edge loop here. Alt, left mouse button, and click on it. And now we can hit extrude, but special extrude.
Special, but normal extrude.
Yes. Alt E, and then extrude along normals.
You should just give them all really like plain names, like normal extrude, plain extrude.
Okay, and you see you have some slight variation here. We can easily add this. It adds a little bit more complexity to it. If we want to do that, we can add just a few more loops. We can actually do this if we undo this, Control R, and then we can Control R, and then we can use the scroll wheel to add loops to it, like this. And now we can right click, and then we can just select a few of these loops. Control, Shift, Alt, and click on it. And now we can scale these in just so we get a little bit more variation. That is S and then Shift Z. And now you can see it just scales in just a little bit like this. We can also just scale the entire object up a little bit, just so it doesn't intersect with this. Just hit the S key to scale in object mode. Select everything first, and then we can just scale it up just a little bit. And now we just got to fill in the bottom part as well. So Alt, left mouse button click, and now we select this. And then we hit Extrude for E for Extrude. And then we hit the S key to scale it in, like so. So what we can see is going to happen when we add a subdivision surface now. This is just going to be nice and smooth like this. Disable the edit mode. Now we can just hit the tab key to go between this. Now we need to add a lot of supporting loops here. So we can do this by Ctrl R. You might have guessed it. Ctrl B. So you just keep using the same tools as before. We're just going to speed up a little bit. Maybe we want this to be a little bit sharper as well, so add a little bit rounder. So add a one in the middle, right click, and then S.
It's a really simple workflow once you start to get it down. And you might have to sit with this for a few days before all the hotkeys become intuitive. But just for pure modeling like this, there aren't actually that many things to consider and keep in mind. Like Henning said, it is you're using a select few tools every single time.
You can just scale this up a little bit because it looks a bit weird. Like this. And then for the center one as well, we now have an Ngon here, which again we just need to fix. This time we can fix it with in a different way. We can use an Inset, just hit the I key, and then we can do it again. And then we can hit Alt and M. This is going to merge it. So merge at center. And now you can see this creates triangles for you. And triangles is really not a problem when they're inside here. Hit the tab key to go out of it, and now you can see we have a very nice and clean model. Now, the one thing we have left, well, two things to have left to model. We have the actual lightsaber beam, the light beam?
The laser, I don't know.
Yeah.
That magical crystal beam.
That one.
Which is going to be probably the easiest thing to model.
Yeah, probably. So what we can do now is we're going to model these things here, and we're going to use a slightly different approach to this. We're going to be doing this in a more procedural way, which just means we're going to let the computer do a lot of the work. So we already have the base for it, like we already have a cylinder for the bottom here. So what we can do now is we can go into edit mode, and then we can just cut where one of them is. Make sure that this is disabled, so you're not seeing subdivisions in your model. And then just cut where this is. And then we can Alt click here, and we can select the loop. Now, if we want to duplicate this, we just want to create another piece of geometry from this. We hit Shift D, and then now we have another piece. Right click to cancel the moving, and then we can P key to selection. And this might seem a bit complicated, but this is exactly the same thing you've been doing now for the last 20 minutes or so. It really is just the exact same thing. So now we have separated this out as a separate piece, and now we can just find this in the outliner. This is now cylinder 08. Hit the tab key to go into edit mode, and now we can very easily just extrude this up. Hit the A key, hit Alt E, and then we can extrude along faces as normals. Now you can just see we just want to extrude this out so it has some thickness to it. And what we have here, which is a bit of an interesting challenge, is we have this metal thing in the middle. So we're just quickly going to just add that. Now, this is where you really want these here to not be connected, because this would have to be separate materials. So if something has a separate material, you really don't want this to be directly connected to it. So we'll show you that.
This is also where we run into an interesting dilemma, because what we've done before is whenever there's been a different material, we've separated it out as a separate object. But what we're going to do here is we're actually going to keep everything as the same object, but we're still going to have the faces be disconnected. So they're technically not connected, but they're still contained within the same object.
Yeah, you could in theory have like 1,000 different objects within the same mesh item for it.
Might be a little tricky to understand, but we'll show you what we mean.
Yeah, exactly. So Ctrl R just to add an edge loop, right click, and then we hit Ctrl B again, and then we just add it based on reference so it fits approximately here. Then we're going to scale it up just a little bit, just S and then Shift Z, just to scale it up like so we get a bit nicer shapes for it. Then we can use Inset. Inset is really nice in these situations. We can scale it in just a little bit like so, and just Inset again, and then we can scale it out again Shift Z.
So you can see here we're using Inset to actually create our beveling as well. So it's like in one operation. An important difference to note here between extrusion and insetting is that extrusion actually creates new geometry that you can extrude out from, whereas insetting only creates new geometry within the object itself.
Yeah, inset doesn't really change the shape of it. So what we can do now is we need this to be an actual separate piece. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be selecting the edges on top and the bottom here, and then we're going to be splitting them off. So if we now shift click here and shift click or alt shift click, then we can right click, and then we can do split edge split down here.
So that effectively takes the edge and then creates another edge and then disconnects them. So now the top part, the middle part, and the bottom part aren't connected by edges anymore, because it's kind of like you took a scissor and just cut them.
Yeah, you can see this if I were to move this around now. You can see they're no longer connected. So if we hit the tab key now, we already have a modifier because it was on the old object. Now you now see we get this incredibly sharp and nice line here. We can add another loop here on the top just to give it a bit more sharpness. Right click to kill it, or to kill the transformation here, and now we can just see what it looks like. So the real magic here really happens when it comes to the modifier system. So we already used one modifier, and that's just to make it smooth, but we can also use another one to duplicate this around. This has huge benefits, because now we can make one and we can modify to our heart's content, and it's always going to be live. If we hit add modifier under, just make sure under the wrench, and then we add modifier and we hit array, now you can see what happens. It just adds a single copy of it in the x-axis. You see, you know it's under x because it has because it's under x, y, and z. Let's just collapse this. So if we were to move this right now, it would move it in the x-axis. Set this to 0 because we don't want any transformation in the x-axis, and we don't want anything in the y-axis, but we want something in the z-axis. So we just move it up just a little bit so it fits the reference. Around 1.3, 1.4 is going to work quite well for this, I think. If you want a bit more precision as well, you can hold on the shift key, and then you can just drag on the slider here. So now we moved it to where we want it to be, but we don't have the correct amount. So now we can go under the count and just hit 1, 2, 3, 4. And we can just move this up just a little bit more as well. So now you can see that we have all these pieces here, and it's all procedural. So if we go to the original shape and we were to add more like finer loops here to sharpen up, you can see this propagates through to the other ones. This workflow in Blender is super useful, and it's honestly one of my favorite pieces of Blender. It makes modeling so fast.
And if you were to change the vertices or like move the faces around on the original, what Henning mentioned before about it being live means that that update gets propagated to all the other arrays as well.
Very useful stuff. So the last thing we have to do now, we have to make the blade up here, the actual light blade. So we're going to be using a slightly different technique for this. We're going to be using what's called a 3D cursor. So we see down here we have a 3D cursor. And we briefly talked about this in the first video. If we were to make a new piece of geometry now, this would be made at the 3D cursor. So we are going to move the 3D cursor up here to this point. So select the top piece, hit the tab key, and then we select the piece where we want the 3D cursor to be. Basically, where do we want this new piece to be created? The reason we do this is because we want the cylinder to be created here, so we have this nice lightsaber blade. And we can do this by hitting Shift S, and then we can do cursor to active. And now you can see we have a 3D cursor at this point now. By itself, that does nothing. You know, right now we just have a 3D cursor there. But if we now were to hit Shift A, mesh, and then cylinder, basically the same thing we did before. Now we, like when we first started, now we have a new piece of geometry at this exact point. We can set the vertices down to 16 like so, and then we can scale it down. Now you can see it fits in the exact spot we had it. And then we can actually delete the bottom part. We don't need that. So just zoom in, delete, and hit the X key, and delete faces. We can take the top part. And now this is where the question becomes like, how long is the lightsaber blade? I don't know. So we're just gonna kind of try it out. We can hit G and then Z, and we can just move it up. This just constrains it to it. So you can see in the left viewport here, I'm just moving the mouse up. So maybe this is a good length for it.
Yeah, maybe. We're probably going to get a lot of comments on like how inaccurate this is. It's interesting as well with the lightsaber thing, right? Because it looks kind of flimsy when it's like super thin like that. But in reality, quotation marks are being made here. You know, it's like it always looks like a thick beam.
Yeah.
Well, I guess you wouldn't really have that.
So now we can do the same thing we did before as well. Now it gets a bit tricky to navigate up here sometimes. So you just need to hit the tilde key or the key below your escape and hit view selected. Now it's going to zoom into this. And now we can extrude this a little bit up, and then we can scale it in. We want this to be like a nice rounded effect. Extrude up a little bit and scale it in, and extrude up a little bit and scale it in, and just move it up a little bit. Like so. And then we can use the grid fill feature from before as well. Just hit X, delete faces. Now we can go into the edge mode up here, hit the Alt key, and then spacebar, and then grid fill. It's already be selected because it's the last thing we search for. And then we can just hit the offset. This doesn't really matter. It just makes my modeler brain a lot happier to see this. So let's see what happens now if we were to add a subdivision surface to this. Ctrl 1. So up here, you're probably going to see a lot of stretching right now. Just because there were no loops in between. So we probably just want to add a few loops in between here. Ctrl R, and then we can just add a few loops.
It's always good practice to have loops, especially on really long objects like this, to distribute the subdivision. So the way that subdivisions work is that they look at how far away is the next edge, and then it'll try to average the position from the middle edge in between those two edges.
Then we right mouse button and shade smooth, and we now have a really nice model here, which may or may not be correct based on Star Wars lore.
We're probably going to get told that it's not correct.
Yeah, it's probably not correct.
But who cares? It's a cool lightsaber.
Yeah, exactly. So there are obviously more things you can do here as well. You know, you could add this paneling here, which you would do just by adding a cube and just modeling this here, adding the cylinders for these things. You can always add more resolution to it, but at some point you just gotta say it's fine as well. Make sure that every single piece has smooth shading on it. This becomes important later on. So whenever you're done modeling, just make sure everything has subdivision surfaces, everything has smooth shading, and everything looks good in the viewport. So in the next chapter, we are going to be looking at how we can assign the shaders to this in Blender, and then eventually we're going to be looking into how we can make this a really nice and sexy render within Blender. So we'll see you in the next chapter. And if you want to see more content like this in the future, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And definitely let us know in the comments what kind of assets you want to see us do in the future, what kind of more Blender videos you want to see us do.
So if you want to follow along with this chapter that you've just watched, make sure to head over to the FlippedNormals Marketplace. There's a link in the description where you can pick up the free project files for this lightsaber project. So we have project files for each chapter. So you can kind of follow along to see, okay, what is the progress from chapter to chapter here.